What is up, Chiefs Kingdom? Welcome into another episode of Know Your Role. I'm Xavier Catania, and my role is to host this podcast. I'm coming to you live from the KC Sports Company. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on all the social medias at KC Sports Company, and make sure you check out the website, kcsportscompany.com. Use my promo code Know Your Role for 15% off your purchase. And you can also pick up a premium hoodie, a hat, or a t-shirt while you're there. We're in peak off-season form right now, and off-season workout vids are in full force. They're going crazy. Handed catches, Deneric Prince just showing off his footwork. I mean, the dude's lifting weights. There's all kinds of workout videos going around right now. That's like the perfect time of year for that. Everyone is getting in shape for camp. Everyone is trying to get hyped up for camp, and we're about 2 to 2.5 weeks out from camp right now. So I'm super excited for that. Can't wait to actually have some real stuff to talk about other than Chris Jones' face looking horrible in Madden and Chris Jones calling them out for it. And basically tweeting and saying, hey, I'm gonna be on you until you get this fixed. So that's pretty funny. He looks ridiculous. Almost looks a little bit like a Homer Simpson type character. And the new Madden is wild. I don't know how they can put so much time into that game every year and still have stuff like that happen. Um, there was also a story about Andy Reid's text leaking that he would sent in effort to recruit Drew Tranquil to the Chiefs, which was ultimately successful. And Andy Reid was telling him to think red, think Super Bowls. And I think it's great that that is really the truth. Like, if you want to come win a title, you want to come to KC. But also, I think it's funny to send that to the leading tackler from a division rival and ultimately be bringing him onto the team and stealing him away from the Chargers. Uh, and I'm happy Drew Tranquil's around. If you go back to episode 2, I believe I did a breakdown on Drew Tranquil. I'm very, very excited about him. I think that's one of the more sneaky signings of the offseason that people aren't talking about, but will make an impact. Um, and aside from that, Travis Kelce's been in the news a lot. I did a whole breakdown on why Travis Kelce doesn't run soft in my last episode and why he is the best after the catch that we've ever seen in the league, especially at tight end. Um, so I'm not going to get too much into that anymore, but Travis Kelce was in the news a week and a half ago because he did a Vanity Fair interview, and he was very candid in the interview. He uh, explained his love for winning and why he's okay with not getting his absolute top dollar market value in order to stay on a winning team, even though he did express a desire to make more money. He basically said that his every time he talks to his management or agent about wanting more money, they always tell him why don't you go talk to the Chiefs about that, because he is making about half of the yearly salary of the top wide receivers in the league. And as we discussed in my last episode, he produces like a top wide receiver in the league. Um, but he is getting paid roughly 14 million a year. And I think it's a pretty low number for the production that comes from Travis Kelce, but it's also a very high number for tight end in general. I think most teams in the league spend about a quarter of that on their entire tight end room. And it's actually a really good strategy that we saw used by New England back in the day, which was use your tight end like a receiver, but pay him like a tight end. And that creates a big advantage for the roster build of your team, especially if it's a guy like Kelce or a guy like Gronk that the Patriots had. It makes a lot of sense. But um, I believe that the Vanity Fair article was, like, very humanizing, and it was interesting to get a glimpse into the mind of the greatest tight end to ever do it, because I think that he has his priorities straight, and he understands what he wants, and he understands what makes him happy, and that's why it's very frustrating to me that Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk just continues to be obsessed with other grown men's pockets. It makes no sense to me of why he's so obsessed with wanting the Chiefs to pay their entire salary cap to a couple of players. I think maybe he's tired of the dominance. I also think he's got something deep down where he just does not like the Chiefs because of the history of this, and we've discussed that in previous episodes. Earlier this offseason, I addressed his attack at Patrick Mahomes for taking less money than he could ultimately make to win Super Bowls. And he is right when he talks about the fact that Kelce and Mahomes are setting the tone for the rest of the team. And um, maybe setting it up to where other people on the team might not be as keen to go and ask for their absolute top dollar. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true because we see what's going on with Chris Jones right now, and I think that does get done, but I don't think that it discourages people from getting what they're worth. I think it does set the tone of we care about winning here. And you can put your personal stuff, you can take care of that stuff, but that is ultimately secondary to the goals, the collective goals of the team, of the staff, of the players, and of the city, of the ownership, and everyone involved with this franchise. There are very clear priorities in line, and I think it's good to have someone, the really the top two faces of your franchise setting the tone in that way. Um, Tom Brady did the same thing, and I think it's necessary to put the team over the self in order to build a dynasty like the one the Chiefs are building right now. I really truly feel that winning is the most important thing because winning brings more opportunity for life after football, and taking the biggest check possible is not always the most advisable thing to do. We look at like a Le'Veon Bell, who took a bigger contract from the Jets than he was offered from the Steelers, but in the process, he alienated a really good franchise, and he showed himself to be super selfish. And because of that, when he came in and didn't perform at his top dollar contract, they got rid of him very quickly. He fell out of relevance very fast. And that, I understand that's a running back, and that's a common story for the running backs, but it's just one case. Jimmy Graham is also another really good example of what can happen when a tight end chases wide receiver pay. And Jimmy Graham had a great situation with a Hall of Fame quarterback in Drew Brees, and burst onto the scene, was being used as a slot receiver, was not really your traditional tight end, similar to the way Kelce is not your traditional tight end. And he was ultimately pushed out of New Orleans, and I believe his career was shortened because of that. Now, his career was shortened because of injuries as well, but he left a great situation where an offense was designed around him and they had a real chance to win a lot of Super Bowls. And he decided to go and take the biggest contract he could. Now, more power to him, but I believe that that is a famine mentality. I think the media discusses these things with the famine mentality as well. And I do believe that it's important for most players to max out their contracts while they have the chance, because we all know the statistics. Most NFL careers are less than 3 years. These guys need to make their money while they can. But there is nuance to the situation. Guys like Kelce and Mahomes can play the long game, and build their legacy and set up long-term relevancy as a Hall of Famer and multiple Super Bowl time winner. And I think the Capital One match is like a perfect example of why it's important to win over everything else. Because especially if you're a superstar player and you are able to pair up with a quarterback like Mahomes, a coach like Andy Reid. I mean, there are opportunities that are coming to Travis Kelce solely because of the fact that he is on a winning team. Okay, there are a lot of great receivers in the league, but Travis Kelce was the one hosting SNL this year. And he clearly has been talking about wanting to have an acting career after football. So that's like open a lot of doors for him to be able to go do that and do it well and show that he was competent. But Justin Jefferson's not doing that. It's because Kirk Cousins is his quarterback. There's no way Kelce is playing in the Capital One match and hosting SNL if he's got Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback. And this is something that Colin Cowherd talked about after all of this hubbub happened. And I completely agree with what Cowherd was saying. And it's not often that I say that, but it does bring so many more opportunities to be on a winning team. And all-time greats, I think, can stay relevant their entire lives if they want to. They will always have opportunities to do ads. Joe Montana's like 400 years old, and he's doing Skechers ads and all kinds of stuff still. There's way more at stake here than just, another $10 million per year. And yeah, that's a lot of money. That's not anything to scoff at. But Travis Kelce has also already made $60+ million in his career. He'll be close to $100 million career earnings by the time he finishes out this contract that he's currently under. And I just don't really think that making 125 or 150 million as opposed to 100 million in a career is going to make a huge difference on your long-term relevancy, on your legacy, on the way that people remember you, the way that your fan base remembers you. um, I think it's very noble for guys to stay with a team for most of their career, especially if it's a good team. It's easy to stick around. But I think that players who have already defied the odds and been in the NFL for more than 3 years and become household names, I think it's very smart for them to chase rings and chase legacy, because that's playing the long game. That's playing the game of, I'm going to be around. I believe in myself to go do what is necessary to stay relevant and continue to make a living after football. It's clear Travis Kelce has the skills. I mean, his podcast is great. Him and his brother are magnetic. I don't think he's going to have any trouble continuing to build himself up and make as much money as he really wants. I mean, he could probably make more money after football than he's making right now. And he's also not broke. So, I think the conversation within the media needs to change a little bit in some of these instances. Uh, I don't believe that the Chiefs are con artists, as Mike Florio said. I don't believe that they are conspiring on ways to make Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce make less money. I don't think that that's happening. I think that there is a great situation going on right now, and people who are not fans of it are going to hate on that, and that's fine. And we could just let them hate on it and keep winning. So moving on from that, I want to jump into another conversation that's been a little bit, it's been hot and cold. Kadarius Toney's been getting into it with the New York media, and look, the New York media sucks. So I'm not going to be really upset about that, about the fact that there's some back and forth going on there. Uh, I I do think that Tony was justified in some of the things that have been said. Um, but I also understand why fans of the Giants would be a little bit less than satisfied with the Kadarius Toney experience that they've had, just because he had basically one really good game where he flashed that he has the potential where he could be a number one receiver. And then other than that, he's been hurt. He's had a lot of mental issues that we don't really get much insight into other than what the teams have done with him. And I I do think that it's a bit of an indication of his maturity level and his mental state that he just can't stop talking about New York. Now, it was really funny that he fitted his Super Bowl ring to his middle finger and made that whole video. And I thought that was funny, especially because the New York media was kind of coming after him and saying that he didn't contribute at all to the Super Bowl, and that is clearly false. I mean, he has the longest punt return in Super Bowl history, so that's not true. But his snap share was low in that game, and um, I'm just concerned a little bit because I watched what happened in New York with Kadarius Toney, and I'm kind of seeing the same pattern emerge here in KC that led to New York fans kind of not liking him. And it's not anything really that Tony did that I can, from what I can tell. Now, whatever happened with him and Brian Dable and why he wasn't more part of the offensive plan, I don't know. We may never know what really went on there. I think they were frustrated with his injuries, and I think he is kind of an eccentric guy. He's definitely a little different, and that may be a problem for some people. So I don't want to pick on the guy. I just seen him get hyped up as a first round pick, and New York Giants fans were so hyped on him. They had all of these crazy expectations about him being the wide receiver one. He didn't live up to that right away, and the fan base started to turn on him. And I'm seeing the same thing happen in Kansas City. I mean, I sincerely hope that he can take a step forward and be a wide receiver one in the league, but the red flags are still there, the injury concerns and the mental concerns. And the injury stuff popped up last year, not only during the season, but in the playoffs, as he left the AFC Championship game with an injury. And the mental concerns are still there as well. I mean, it's clear that he spends too much time on social media, and that can rot your brain, especially if you're looking at people just talking crap on you constantly. And I have a little bit of apprehension about this. I think KC fans have already accepted Tony as the next best wide receiver in the NFL. And I just think it's really unfortunate when that stuff happens, because if he doesn't live up to this hype and he goes 8 games and is not producing this year, people are going to start to wonder, like, what's going on here? And maybe that's not even fair. Maybe he needs a little bit more time than that to get rounded out into the system. Um, but I just always hate when these expectations get built up, because a guy like MVS, no one was expecting him to be insanely good last year. We knew he had a role on the team, and when he stepped up and had a good game when we needed him, that was awesome, and everyone loved it. But had the expectations been higher, people would not like him. And now the expectation is that Tony's going to immediately take over the wide receiver one position, which he's never shown the ability to do. And he has flashed. He's clearly got insane amount of talent. That's never been the issue. Um, I'm just not going to crown him until he comes out and proves that he can be what he's being sold as being. I personally think that Sky Moore has a just as good of a chance as Kadarius Toney as taking that wide receiver one role. Um, he doesn't quite have the alien qualities that Kadarius Toney has, but he also doesn't have the risk factor that Kadarius Toney has. And consistency often is what rises to the top in the NFL. I do not want people to think that I'm down on Kadarius Toney. I think he's a great player. I have real concerns about the injuries, and I have real concerns about his mental state. And um, I hope that he continues to fit in with KC. He's obviously fit in very well. He loves Coach Reed. He loves Patrick Mahomes. And I think that being happy with your situation can change a lot of things. So maybe the same things that happened in New York with Dable will manifest themselves. Um, but I'm not going to run out to best case scenario on it. I'm not going to sit here and pump up his expectations to the ceiling because I don't think that's fair to players like that. I think that we need to give him time to grow into the role that they're carving out for him. And I think we need to give him time to learn how to be a consistent producer in the NFL because that's something we have not seen yet. So just being realistic here, and we're going to get to a break, but right after the break, we're going to talk about DeAndre Hopkins a little bit because he's still on the market. And then we're going to get into some training camp preview stuff. We're going to talk about some players to look out for on July 23rd when camp starts and some names that I'm going to be keeping my eye on. So.
What up, KC? On the heels of yet another Kansas City Super Bowl victory, we have an awesome opportunity for you to broadcast your business to the local Kansas City market. We've created something called Kansas City Sports Company, which is a sports media hub for multiple live shows, all of which cover all the local Kansas City teams. Now, we have 30-second ad spots, 60-second ad spots, we have event sponsorships, studio sponsorships, show sponsorships, and much, much more. This is a great opportunity for you to start early with us and broadcast your business to a very dedicated, very enthusiastic Kansas City audience. Contact me or hit the Contact Us link on our website to learn more about this opportunity.
Welcome back into Know Your Role. We're talking DeAndre Hopkins, who is still holding out to play with a contender. It was tweeted recently that he doesn't want to end his career catching passes from Mac Jones or Ryan Tannehill. He would really prefer to play with a better quarterback. And I think it's very telling that he's waiting because I think he's waiting for the Chiefs to extend Chris Jones so that they have the cap space to pay him. I believe it will probably end up being a 1 to 2 year deal that's around the middle of the per year market with a pretty big guarantee up front. I don't believe that the Chiefs have the ability to sign him long term. I don't think that Hopkins is necessarily asking for a super long term contract. I think he wants to go and win. I think he wants the benefit of getting to play with an all-time quarterback. I think he wants the ability to chase a ring. I think he wants the immortality that we've been talking about with Travis Kelce. I think that he understands that, hey, even if the Tennessee number is higher or the Patriots number is higher, it's probably not worth it for his overall legacy and career. He is a borderline Hall of Famer. If he gets a ring, he's probably in the Hall of Fame. And the Hall of Fame does a lot more for your career than, as we talked about earlier, $5 extra million on your paycheck. Especially when you're a guy like him who's been making top of the receiver market money now for quite a while. He's up into his 30s or close to his 30s. He's hasn't seemed to lose a step yet. And I think he's still got a lot to offer. Now, I don't believe that the Chiefs absolutely need him. I think the Chiefs have a pretty deep roster at wide receiver, one of the deeper ones that they've had since Mahomes has been on the team. I think top to bottom, we have guys who can step in and make plays at any time, all the way down to Richie James and Justin Watson. I think there's a lot of great players on this roster, but keeping in mind what we talked about in the first segment of the concerns and the limitations that have arisen around Kadarius Toney over his career, I think that it wouldn't be the worst thing ever for the Chiefs to still be going after DeAndre Hopkins. I think he would, I mean, this isn't even I think, he would be the most proven wide receiver in that room immediately. He would bring that veteran presence immediately. He would give a lot of flexibility if Tony sustains an injury or if Sky Moore doesn't live up to what he needs to be. I mean, we're putting a lot of trust into two receivers that really haven't proven much at all to be the top two receivers. And if those guys aren't willing to do that, I don't think we want to see what happens when Marquez Valdez Scantling is the top receiver on the team. I like MVS. I think he's a fine player, but we don't want him to be our number one. We can get away with it in a game or two, but if teams are game planning to have their best coverage on Kelce and Marquez Valdez Scantling, that's going to be a problem for the Chiefs. So I don't think that the Chiefs are as solid at wide receiver as some of the fans want people to believe. And I know other fans are worried about the money situation. They say extend L'Jarius Sneed, extend Chris Jones, extend um, Nick Bolton, and make sure we can extend all of these guys that need to be extended. And I do agree with that. I also wonder, though, is L'Jarius Sneed in the long-term plans for the Chiefs? They haven't signed a corner long-term that I can remember since like Brandon Flowers, maybe. Um, Brett Veach definitely has never done it. They let Charvarius Ward walk, and at the time, people were very worried about him leaving, but it was a pretty seamless transition into the secondary that they had last year. And I think Sneed brings a lot more to the table than a guy like Ward, being that Sneed can play inside and out. He can play a lot of different roles within the defense, which brings a lot of flexibility to the defense. Um, so I believe he is worth more than Charvarius Ward to this defense. I wouldn't be surprised to see him be the first corner the Chiefs invest in long term. But I'm not married to that idea, and I also think that it would be great to have a world-beating defense, but the offense is what's been winning for the Chiefs. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has had some of the least defensive help throughout his entire career. And we've gotten it done with offense. 5 straight AFC title games, 3 Super Bowls, 2 wins in the Super Bowl. And they've gotten it done by relying on their offense. And we have a good young core of talent on the defense to where I don't think it's really going to kill the team to go out and sign arguably a top 5 receiver in the NFL. I mean, I don't think people are really giving the credit that to Hopkins of what he could bring to this offense. I mean, it would literally open things up to every other player in that offense because now you have a very similar situation to what you had with Tyreek and Kelce. And DeAndre Hopkins is obviously a much different archetype of receiver, but you still have an alpha presence that has to make defenses adjust. And I think that would be very, very useful to Andy Reid as the season goes on, especially if Tony and Sky Moore actually do show out. Well, then that's more and more abundance of weapons for Patrick Mahomes to have at his disposal. Now, if Hopkins did come in, it would leave some tough decisions for the Chiefs in their wide receiver room. Would it mean that they get rid of Justin Watson or Richie James? Because the Chiefs have only been carrying 6 wide receivers for I think every year that Andy Reid has been in Kansas City. And there there are some variables that maybe could change things. You know, there's no longer a roster spot being taken up by the third QB because it's an emergency QB spot. And they don't count towards the 53-man roster anymore. So there's an extra spot opened up there. Also, getting rid of the fullback in Kansas City has opened up another extra roster spot that's normally not there. So could the Chiefs carry 7 receivers if they bring Hopkins in? I could see it just because Watson and Richie James are going to be big time special teams contributors. And I could see them wanting to carry all of those guys. But it would bring up some interesting questions, and it wouldn't be just as straightforward as move Hopkins in, move the last guy in the room out. Because I think that all of those guys that are in the receiver room right now play a vital role to this team. So that would be an interesting decision to make. But I don't think that having a deep receiver room with maybe not the greatest top end talent and top end level producers on it, I don't think the fact that you have depth should turn you away from going to get DeAndre Hopkins. I think every team would love to have him. And whether it's necessary or not, we're trying to win Super Bowls. That guy will help you win a Super Bowl. I I don't care about the PED stuff. I don't care about any of that. He's still at an age where he can produce, and he has proven over and over and over again that he deserves to be up there with the best of the best to do it. And how could you not want that on your team? So for all the people who are saying we don't need him, I agree. The Chiefs don't need him to be a good team. They're already a great team. But to sit there and say you don't want him, I mean, you just haven't been watching then. So now with that being out of the way, I'm going to close the show talking about some prospects coming up. I want to talk about some of the guys that maybe are a little bit lesser known that I'm going to be keeping my eye on at training camp. As I said before, it starts July 23rd. Very excited to see what some of these guys can do and see how this roster is going to shake out because there are going to be some very interesting position battles. One of those is going to be at running back. And the Chiefs have some pretty good running backs on this roster. And I'm interested to see how many they're going to keep. Will they keep 4? Will they keep 3? I believe that this undrafted free agent, Deneric Prince, is probably going to force them into keeping 4, especially if they can't figure out a way to get rid of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But Deneric Prince has been drawing some Nile Davis comparisons from Dave Tobe. He's a speed score freak. I mean, his profile's nuts. He ran a 4.41, 114.2 speed score. That's 96th percentile because he's also 6 foot, 216. So you put that 4.4 speed with that frame, and that's absolute freak athlete. He was the number 2 athleticism score for his position in this draft class, which makes you wonder, like, why did he fall to undrafted? But I think it's a similar thing to Isaiah Pacheco. He just didn't have really the college production that you would hope for from a guy with this athletic profile. But he's best comparable on Player Profiler to Zamir White, who was a running back prospect that a lot of people loved. I think Zamir went 4th round, middle of the 4th round to the Raiders. Coming out of Georgia, he was a really good prospect, and a lot of people thought he was going to be drafted even higher than he was. And Deneric Prince is a similar story. I mean, he's a little bit older of a prospect. He's 23 as a rookie, which is a bit old, but not crazy for a running back. We've seen a lot of 23-year-old running backs come into the league over the last few years, and it hasn't seemed to be an issue to be that old coming out. he didn't have the greatest production in college. It seems like he dealt with an injury or two, and he also just wasn't on a very good team. Tulsa was not very good during his time there. Um, but he did run for 200 plus yards in two separate games during his senior season at Tulsa, and that made up like uh, pretty much over half of his production from that year, but he only played in 8 games. So he only had 126 rush attempts, and he ended up with 6 touchdowns. I mean, he was fairly productive in the games when he had a chance to be productive. Um, he's earned praise from the Chiefs coaching staff already in the offseason activities for being a pretty good receiver for the size that he has, which is decently rare. I mean, we talked about that with Pacheco as well. Like guys this big are not normally great receivers, and it's really kind of a unicorn trait. Like a Kareem Hunt type of guy is not super common. Um, so I'm very excited about that. I'm want to see his physicality and vision in action during training camp. That's going to be the main thing I'm looking for with him. Like he looks great with no pads on, doing footwork drills, making catches, this and that. He's obviously fast, and he's a pretty punishing runner, but and he often breaks the first tackle, but he has a tendency to run with a pretty high pad level, and that can get you into trouble in the NFL. There are guys who get away with upright running style. You think of like a Derrick Henry type of guy, who standing pretty tall while he's running. But that creates a lot of leverage issues. The good thing is he has the strength to kind of compensate from that, and he does seem to get pretty low when he's driving towards contact, um, because he absolutely is not a guy you really want to tackle. He's like got some Pacheco qualities there, and I believe he's going to move ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire like way quicker than people realize. I I don't believe that CEH is a good running back at all. And I believe guys who come in with the size and speed like a Deneric Prince or an Isaiah Pacheco, I think it's pretty inevitable that they're always going to move ahead of the guy who's 200 pounds running a 4.6. I mean, you come in at 215 running a 4.4. That doesn't sound like a big difference, but that is the biggest difference in the world. That is such a huge difference to be big and fast compared to small and slow. It's the most important thing for a running back to be big and fast. Everything else can be taught, but you can't teach speed and you really can't teach size. So a guy with a size and speed like that, I don't care if he's undrafted. It doesn't matter to me as much where a running back gets drafted. What really matters to me is the traits, because we've seen so many undrafted and late round pick running backs do well. So I'm super excited about Deneric Prince. We're going to be talking about him quite a bit, I feel like, during camp, because I think he's going to flash and it's going to be fun to watch. So now I want to get into a little bit of a position battle at the back of the cornerback room right now. Nick Jones was drafted this year in the 7th round. He's an average athlete, pretty average size, 6 foot, like 190. Doesn't really pop off the page at you athletically, but he's got enough speed to be effective as a corner. He ran a 4.5. He's just a little small, so his speed score is not that impressive. His burst is pretty low. Um, he's in the bottom third in his class in athleticism. So nothing super interesting to write home about there, but he has stood out in the offseason activities. He's made some viral interceptions, made some good plays. Um, the interesting thing to see, just like we say about Deneric Prince, will it translate when the pads are on? Or will he just be exposed as a sub athlete? Because if there's any position where you need to be a freak athlete, it's corner. You're just in such a losing position as a corner. You have to have the athleticism to make up for some of those shortcomings, especially as a seventh round pick. Um, I'll be interested to see if he does it. Now, the thing that makes me a little hesitant to say he will be able to, and he'll be more than just a practice squad guy, at least for this year, is that Najee Johnson, the seventh rounder from 2022, has already been on the team. He is a much better athlete, 90 plus percentile in 40-yard speed and in burst. He is 95th percentile in burst. I mean, freaky athlete, good speed score. He's about 2 inches shorter than Nick Jones, but 10 pounds heavier. So not a small guy, pretty stout, middle of his class in athleticism. His agility is a little low, but he's got long arms, big catch radius, um, able to get his hands on the ball from a lot of different angles. But the thing that makes me think Najee Johnson will make the team over Nick Jones is that Dave Toub already loves him. Dave Toub mentioned that he's one of the best gunners in the NFL already during the season last year, and that was his rookie year. And it makes sense that he's a good gunner. I mean, the athleticism is off the charts. So if you have any kind of uh, coaching ability to take coaching or IQ of football, you should be in a pretty good spot as a gunner with that athletic ability. But that's going to be a great battle to watch because on one hand, you've got a guy who maybe on paper isn't as good, but has been making plays and kind of flashing and making the coaching staff take notice. And then you have a guy who does everything you need to do to stick on a roster as a seventh round pick. He is a contributor on special teams, team guy, really good in practice, and loved by the coaches. So to me, Najee Johnson is going to round out the corner room, and I think Nick Jones would be the odd man out. But it'd be interesting to see what happens there. Maybe both of them are able to sneak their way onto this team, and somebody we're not even talking about gets pushed out. But time will tell on that. Very excited to see that battle. Now, the very last thing I want to talk about, this is a very selfish thing for me to talk about because I have had a soft spot for this guy for a couple of years now. I've had him on one of my taxi squads for my dynasty teams for since he got drafted, basically, and that's Amir Smith-Marset. He was drafted in the 5th round in 2021 by the Minnesota Vikings, and he's a receiver. He's got a similar play style to MVS, although he is about 3 inches shorter and slightly slower, but his play style is very similar. He's field stretcher, very much a big play guy. Not a guy who is going to be consistently catching a bunch of passes or anything like that, but he does have above average burst and catch radius. He has pretty long arms. He's able to get down the field good and make some acrobatic catches. Um, he had a 32% dominator rating at the University of Iowa, which is not a team that's really known for their receiving ability. They kind of are like the tight end U. They're like really, really good at producing linemen and tight ends. So to see a receiver come out of Iowa, it's not a surprise that he's not super highly touted, but a 32% dominator is nothing to shake a stick at. That's very good, especially in the Big Ten. And he did flash in the NFL. The final game of the 2021 season as a rookie, he caught 3 passes for 103 yards and a touchdown. Now, obviously, that speaks to his profile as a big play guy, but also speaks to his ability to do it in an NFL game. He didn't really get a chance before that. He only played 8 games his rookie year. I think he was a healthy scratch for some games. He missed a few games with a toe injury. And then he was on the practice squad for the Chiefs all year last year and never got his chance to be called up. I'm not saying that he's going to make the initial 53-man roster, but you get a couple of injuries in that in that receiver room, if he's able to flash, he may get his chance at some point. The team is familiar with him. He knows the playbook. They've kept him around to see what he can do for another year. Now, year 3 for receivers is kind of make or break year. You either are going to do something or you're not going to do something. A lot of times by the 3rd year, if the receivers aren't doing anything, it's a good chance they'll never do anything. And we've already talked about how crowded the receiver room is. But I believe that these guys like Amir Smith-Marset are important. They're important to challenge the back of the roster, to challenge Justin Watson and Richie James to be on their best, because a guy like Smith-Marset, if he does come into his own and get comfortable on an NFL field, I believe he could be a contributor. Do I think he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver? No, probably not. He'll probably never do that. But we're talking about back of the roster guys, really long shot guys in a sense. And I think Amir could really do some good things in camp this year and give the Chiefs some issues with how they decide to round out this roster. I'm going to be talking a lot more about the 53-man roster, about what the depth chart's going to be looking like over the next couple of weeks as we lead up to training camp. So make sure you stick with me and we can watch this roster take shape together. I'll have a 53-man prediction here within the next week or two so we can track that throughout camp and see how close I get. So make sure you're keeping up with KC Sports Company, subscribing on YouTube, you're checking out and subscribing on Spotify and all the other podcast platforms. Make sure you check out the social media at KC Sports Company. I'm at Know Your Role X on Twitter. Check out the website. Make sure you use the promo code Know Your Role at kcsportscompany.com for 15% off all your merch. As always, I'm Xavier Catania saying know your role and shut your mouth.